Hello, I am your everyday average Jonathan. Join me this week while I take this and make it into this, a great sword for a dear, dear friend. Hello, I am your everyday average Jonathan. I am an ordinary guy with ordinary tools making extraordinary items. And this week I have what might be one of the most precious builds for me, or most important builds for me, you could say. I get to make a sword for none other than the very person that really got me into making swords and armors and exposed me to the world of recreation, fantasy, the whimsical. I couldn't feel more honored. At the same time, I have to be honest, I actually have a little bit of pressure on me on this one because he's such an artisan himself that in my world, this would be like sculpting something for Michelangelo and hoping that he likes it. But without further ado, we're at the shop. Let's go get started. But I need to stop. Before I get into this build, there's something that I must say, I have to say, and I'm thrilled to say. Basically, going way back from the age somewhere between 8 and 10, I started to collect swords, pieces of armor, helmets, that sort of thing, fantastical recreations, and have kept a lot of these things and grew an interest. As a kid, I read voraciously. It'll be a surprise, but I was homeschooled for much of my young life. We didn't have a TV growing up, so we did a lot of things outdoors, and we were in our mind a lot of the time. Following me from a young age all the way through to where I am now, like a trail of cast-off weapons or movie props, were things like this sword. This is a sword made from aluminum, and things like this gauntlet that were made back in the 1980s. I have many of swords like this. I have many pieces of armor that are 30, maybe even 40 years old. Many of my friends and my family also have weapons and things like this too. Pretty much all of these came from a single person that I met, I think, when I was 7 or 8. The reason why I'm taking the time to talk about this is this person is singularly one of the most important people to my formative years, and gave me the desire to create in the terms of a fantasy of recreation. And now in my shop, I make all sorts of things. All of that would not have been possible without this particular person. This person had a massive impact on my group of friends where I grew up in the mountains of California. He's an indelible figure that we all talk about. We all talk about with hysterical stories, silly exploits, and things that people probably cannot believe that we actually did as young kids and then young men and young women. For me, the build that I'm about to take on could possibly be one of the most important builds I've ever done. I'm so honored to be able to do it. When I and my friends and family, when we left our childhood home and many of us went to college, we fell out of touch with this person. And honestly, that's something that I tremendously, tremendously regret, and I have feelings of guilt and shame over. But through the miracle of technology, I found him on Facebook about 2 years ago, and I just reached out to say hi to him, and I thought he would be angry with me, and he wasn't. Well, fast forward, we've rekindled a conversation over the interwebs. We talk on the phone each month, and over the summer, he told me that he was leaving California and he was going to be moving to Kentucky. And on his way through, having this big caravan that he was going to bring, he asked if he could stop by my home in northern Colorado. Of course I said yes. I haven't seen him in 30 years. And in many ways, I didn't really know what to expect when I saw him. So, meet my dear friend Skott. On a September evening, he rolled up with his caravan, and it was a trip down memory lane. Skott was the arbiter, the creator of a group of us, a group of young men and women that we built weapons, we built armor, and then we would go out on weekends, and instead of playing with cars or playing sports necessarily, we beat each other up. We would do actual sword fights. We would actually hit each other hard. There were injuries aplenty. There were broken fingers, broken teeth, broken bones of other sorts. We had everything from horseback fights. We actually had bows and arrows. Yes, we shot padded arrows at each other. Yes, they still definitely hurt. But for somewhere between 8 and 10 years, this is what we did. We became young men and young women through this. We were bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, or well, certain things were bushier than others, but we grew together and we became fast friends through it all. Note there was one thing that we wouldn't do though. We didn't play Dungeons and Dragons because that was for true dorks. So how serendipitous it has felt for me to walk with my old friend, to show him what I have done in the time that I last saw him, and the things that he instilled in me and the things that I've created. He's known a little bit about them, but it was great to be able to take him to my shop and start to show him around. I got to show him some of the weapons and some of the items that he had created so many years ago. Some of these things were even 40 years old potentially, and he laughed. He loved seeing the arrows that we shot each other with and reminiscing and going down memory lane. And then he brought out this old chainsaw bar. It was 55 inches or greater in length, and he asked me if I would make him a sword. He said that he would pay for it. Of course he's not going to pay for it. And then he started to show me all of the criteria and the things that he wanted in it and the things that he would like to have incorporated into it. And away I went. I did forget to mention that Skott is also the person that designed the logo for my channel. He did have some definite ideas, but he really ended up giving me carte blanche, which is great because I took all of that. Now this is a sword that Skott made way back when. It's made out of aluminum, but what I wanted to show you here is all of these dents. It was used, and some of those dents were made against my noggin or against my blade as well. I was going to keep this aesthetic. This chainsaw blade came, I think someone had cut it either with a torch or a plasma torch, but it was chewed up on the edges. It had looked like it had been used. I have a feeling he had swung it several times because it was definitely cut with the intention for it to be a sword. It was just over 5/32 in thickness. There were a few little issues that I had to take care of, a few little cosmetic band-aids that I had to do, but by and large, once I got this piece welded into the hole for the chainsaw bar, away I was to make the guard. And I must have made many, many, many drawings. This is just a few of them that I made of this guard. Finally, I found a design. I came up with it in my mind's eye during when I was falling asleep, which is not uncommon for me. And I really, really like it. I wanted it to be somewhere between a cross of an antler or a branch of a tree. My friend Skott is many, many things, but he's a master arborist. He climbs trees, he fells trees, he is a master at working with trees. So something like that would probably fit into his aesthetic extremely well. I was just going to cut the form out of this piece of wood. This was going to be a very, very thick piece of bronze I had to cast, probably the thickest piece of bronze that I've ever cast. So I went about and guessed on some of the weight. I thought it was going to be about 2.5 pounds the guard was, so I made sure that I weighed out about 2.5 pounds of bronze. To do that, I found all of my old bullet casings. I had lots of them that I left over, and I tossed them into the kiln, weighed them out. 2.5 pounds later, threw them into the furnace, and just waited and waited. Also, somebody gave me this, I think it's buckshot, a bunch of lead. Some bronze recipes have lead in them, and I think the first time around, as you'll see here, I put way too much lead in. As I said, this is probably the largest casting I've ever done. I didn't have a pan larger than this glass Pyrex dish. It seemed to do the job, but as we'll find out later, there might be some problems with the fact that I put it into the Pyrex disc. So now I feel like I'm playing doctor. I'm just pulling out little shards of sand, little pieces that I needed to get out of there. All right, here we go. This is a lot of fun. I always enjoy pulling molten bronze, molten copper into a form. It's really cool to see how it sets up. Turn off the lights, do a little bit of footage of that there, and it really looks cool. It looks like something out of the Lord of the Rings to me. But lo and behold, Pyrex, even though it's great at baking, it doesn't like the heat that comes from something molten inside of it. That thing blew up. I wasn't near it when it did. I'm very glad I wasn't, but there was glass everywhere. I'm still finding pieces of glass. The other problem, you see what's dripping off of that? That's lead. That's molten lead that was dripping off of that. So this was not going to work. So I cut it to pieces, threw it back in the kiln, put a lot more brass and copper into the kiln as well to dilute the lead down, and round number 2. This time around, it worked. It did its job. It was the right recipe. I had an aluminum pan, so it wasn't going to burst on me. And come out the next day to take a look at it, and it looks like a real crusty something. But polishing it up, I did the angle grinder, I did the die cutter. I like the way this turned out so far. There was still going to be quite a bit of work to be done on it, but next thing is to make the pommel. Scott asked me specifically for a very precise balance point on this, which is about a hand's width from the guard itself. So this was going to be extremely large because that blade is very long. Because he's a master arborist and he's done so much with trees. In fact, one of my initial first memories of Scott has a lot to do with black oak trees. I'll tell that story at another journey. But that leaf was going to be the pommel, and I'm thrilled. Again, it came to me, that design actually came to me not from any book or any internet page that I saw. It just came to me when I was falling asleep one night. This weighed 2.5 pounds. Pulling it right out. When I was done with it, it's probably more like 1 3/4 pounds. Another very fascinating thing, when I am making my amalgamations, my mixtures of bronze, and I put borax into that, the borax becomes this glass coating. And as you saw there, that glass can go right into your fingers. So it's this very glass-like coating. I wanted to leave that error, that fissure that you saw there. I could have recast it, but I just decided to leave it because it looks really earthen. It looks like something the dwarves would have pulled out of the mountainside and hammered on and made for a sword pommel. This pommel was going to go on by threading it on. I was going to weld on the end of a bolt to the handle and then thread that straight onto the pommel that I made there. I've done this before. It's pretty simple. It's probably what most sword makers do. Fit like a glove. I like everything that I'm seeing so far. Now comes time to make the handle, and I was going to make the base of the handle wood. It was going to be a leather-bound handle, but I wanted to fill in a lot of space with wood. So I was going to sandwich it between 2 pieces of that cedar. That's really beautiful cedar, and of course, Scott being the arborist would love cedar. So I'm making the outline of the handle. I'm going to sandwich it between those 2 pieces of wood, and then I'm going to actually cast 2 other, what I will just call ringlets of bronze, to take up the two-handed nature of this, which you'll see here. First things first though, had to get this correct. I'm going to glue it up, let it sit overnight, then I'm going to come back and I'm going to carve into it. Okay, these ringlets, each of them are going to be, one of them is going to separate the 2 hands that hold this sword from each other. The other is just going to be something that integrates the guard straight into the handle itself. So just to cast a little bit more, this time I'm going to cast using my forge. The forge is just way faster. It doesn't do as much, but it's just way faster. And so I really like using the forge for these things because, not just because of the speed, but also I can kind of see much more clearly down into what's happening. And a friend of mine, also a friend of Scott's, told me that I needed to do a better job of removing the slag when I'm casting things. So that's what you see me doing here right now, is removing the slag. It actually works great. It comes over and it casts beautifully. There's much less garbage in the mixture that I have to remove either through grinding or some other way. I debated and debated and debated if I was going to put my artist touch mark into this sword for Scott. It felt in this weird way, I don't want to say sacrilegious, but something. In the end, I decided I was going to do it, but I really went back and forth on that. And I didn't want to heat much more of the blade because this chainsaw bar is already heat treated. It's a very, very good spring steel. So I just wanted to spot heat that one area. These came out great, these 2 ringlets, and as you'll see, I'll just put them to the sanding belt, get them formed, get them much more geometrical, and away you go. Now I'm just going to shape the wooden part of the handle because, as I mentioned, I will be putting leather wrapping over this, so I just wanted to make sure that it was going to have a nice form, almost like holding a hammer in your hand, and it came out great. Lastly, the tip of that guard was protruding slightly off of the steel, and I learned a long time ago that when you're trying to mold and hammer bronze or brass, if you hit it with other steel, you're going to mar it up, so I was using a brass ingot there. Now I'm actually putting all of it together, gluing it up so that it's very firm on there, let it sit overnight, and then come back, and I'm using some contact cement here to put this leather strap on. I was debating about contact cement. We'll see if it actually holds up, but I actually think that it does a great job. The next day, come back out, look at it. I don't like the color. I'm going to dye it black right at the end of the build here, but Before I get to that, I am going to go ahead and hone the edge. And I decided that since I wasn't going to do any heat treatment of this already heat treated chainsaw bar, that I was going to need to cool this off during the process of putting this edge on. So I got that large PVC pipe, filled it with water, and then along the way, as this blade started to heat up, I would just bring it over, dip it in the water, and then bring it back to getting honed. This was probably 2 hours of grinding, actually a little bit more than 2 hours if you take what I'm doing here with the steel wool and other things, just to get this so that it doesn't look all scraped up. The final touch for the blade and for the metal is linseed oil, and that's pretty common, I think, among a lot of blacksmiths. A lot of times I heat it up or heat the metal up, put the linseed oil on, and it'll give it a darkened look, but I didn't want this to be darkened. It had some darkened aspects already. It is just a beast of a sword. It's so large. It's fairly wieldy, but it'll be perfect for Skott. Skott's got some really long arms, some really huge forearms. He's also a blacksmith. I think he's going to just love swinging this around. It's always great to have your daughter come and visit you. And look, she brought me a cup with a sticker on it. And I think it says World's Best Dad or something like that. Look at those indentations, as though they've been bashing shields, helmets, chopping into orcs, bone, sinew, other weapons. I actually love it. As I said, I am going to darken this finally and put the leather to a darker state than what you see. And here she is. Here is the final product. I don't know if actually it's going to be a she. I believe Skott is going to name this sword. It will have a name. It will be something in Sindarian or in Elvish. Via the Tolkien lore, but I'm not certain what it'll be. I'm very curious to see what type of name he wants to give it, and I'll be honored to be a part of the naming of that. Thank you for joining me for this build. I am so happy with this build. I can't stand it. I'm so pleased to have been able to do this, and then this actually makes me emotional thinking about it. Pretty much everything Skott asked me to do from an aesthetic kind of design perspective I didn't do, but here's the thing. I know he's going to be overjoyed for this. I know he's going to be thrilled. He made so many of us, so many weapons, and so many articles and so many interesting things that to be one of the very few people that has paid him back in kind, well, like I said, I'm grateful. Okay, straight in. This sword weighs about 6.75 pounds, which puts it on the high end of what traditional greatswords weigh. It's 55 inches in length. The handle itself is 17 inches, which just tickles me pink. One of the cool things that Skott did ask for, which I asked him where he wanted the balance point to be on this sword, and he said, as if everyone knew this, which I didn't know, he said, well, of course, it needs to be 1 hand width from the guard itself. So 1 hand width from the guard itself is about right there. Believe it or not, that was actually intentional. I actually got that right, and I got it right by just using a whole lot more bronze than I thought that I was going to need, and actually using a bit more lead. So kudos to me for that. I wanted this cross guard here to look a little bit like a cross between maybe branches or antlers. I wasn't sure which one I was going to go with, so I didn't define it too much. I could have carved in here a little bit more indentations to give it more of an antler look, but I just decided to leave it. I didn't want to do too much ornate work on this. My friend Skott, he's very artistic, and at the same time, I don't think he is necessarily, he's certainly not garish, and maybe an ornate thing might not be something that would fit with him too well. But this leaf, I love this leaf. I love how this came out. This came to me in my mind's eye when I was falling asleep, like a lot of things do. And the fact that there was a lot of what I call errors and mistakes right here, all of this raw bronze that's showing right there, and I left it in, I love that. Which brings me to probably the main takeaway for this weapon. This sword has lots and lots of little or big mistakes or things that aren't perfect. And for many, many reasons, impatience, being self-taught, that's how I build. I make things that tend to have little mistakes right and left. I can make the excuse and say they give things personality, but at the end of the day, there might be people that don't want those mistakes. Skott's gonna love them. He's gonna see my personality in that. He's gonna see the efforts that went in. He's gonna know the difficulties, but he's gonna look at these little mistakes and they just give it character. That's really it. I'm not gonna go much into more detail. I can't wait to send this to him and see what he thinks. In terms of a build for me and the grade that I would give it, this is the first time I've ever given myself an A+, and I'm giving myself an A+ because I'm so happy with how it turned out, because I know he's gonna love it. So Skott, when you get this, of course I want to know what you think about it. I can't wait to hear about it. But more than anything else, thank you for all the gifts and blessings that you gave us as young men and young women. You and those gifts mattered tremendously, and you still do.